I tested 5 acrylic marker brands so you don't have to. If you're thinking about buying acrylic markers, don't assume that the most expensive brands are going to be, or the most recognizable brand is automatically going to be best. I've spent months actually using these markers to make artwork, and I've even sold the artwork I've made with them. So I have tested 5 comparable acrylic marker sets to figure out which ones I actually recommend to an artist, I'd give to a hobbyist, and which ones I would personally just skip altogether. I tested Casimir, Meeden, Camir, Artix, and I can never say this one, Gimeo. I did purchase the Artix myself, and the others were all gifted to me by the brands for review. But regardless of that and how I got them, I'm just judging these entirely off how they performed when I actually used them. And before I get into the rankings, there's one thing you need to know. There isn't one acrylic marker that's best for everyone. It really depends on whether you care about opacity, flow, blending, color selection, or how quickly you can get started. Let's start with opacity. The clear winner for me was the Casimir. I did this on black. They are juicy. They are incredibly juicy, to be honest, and they're probably the most opaque markers I have tested. So I will get closer with this guy. They do require shaking, which I don't love, but once you get the paint moving, they put down a really solid layer. On black paper especially, these were super impressive. The one downside I noticed was that when I went back over an area, I could see marks. Uh, so they weren't like as smooth in the application, but they were just very they flowed all the way through. But overall, if your priority is opacity, Casimir wins for me. After that, I'd put Arctics and probably the Jumeo for opacity. The K-Mirror actually started out extremely opaque for me, but I think I may have used these too much before doing this demonstration. They're not performing the way they did when they were new, which is to be expected. The Meeden was at the bottom, and here's why. Meeden, I have to shake, but they were not opaque at all. Look at this comparison. They were just too watery. I found myself layering them and layering them to get the coverage I wanted. And that's not something I personally want to do with acrylic markers. Let's talk about finish. The one thing that stood out was that the Meeden has a shine to it, and you can't tell in this demo, but my other artwork I could. There's a weird shine to them that I do not love, and it's very noticeable in comparison to the other markers, which have more of a matte finish. They all dried down much more matte, which I personally prefer for my artwork. Now let's talk about shaking. The Casimir and the Meeden are both shake markers because this actually matters more than you might think. Casimir and Meeden both require that shaking, so that's going to not be a huge deal for some, but I'm lazy and I don't want to sit there and shake all of my markers. It's just another step before drawing, right? Or painting. So if you're someone who wants to pick up a marker and immediately start working, the Kmere, Artix, and the Gemio are much better ones to grab. And I found them much more convenient for me because I'm trying to paint really fast. Now, color selection. This is where Artix does really well, but I did get their 120 set. The variety of colors is great. They perform particularly well with a lot of the yellows and greens and blues. The one thing that I didn't like about the blues is, like, even though there are a lot of them, there's not one that's super, super light. Um, these also worked well on both black and white paper for me, but I had a problem with these skin tones. There are so many of them that are similar looking colors that it's difficult to tell like what I'm actually getting, and not a lot of the skin tones were particularly opaque. I had another issue with the reds. There's really only one red. There are tons of pinks and oranges, but just one true red. So it's a bright red, but I want a burgundy and maybe like something a little different. And this set just didn't give me enough of that, so Casimir was the only set that I actually found two different reds that I really loved, and when it came to it, the light blue in the Camire grouping was the best for me. I probably don't even have it in here, I'm missing some markers, so their light blue was just really great. And I feel like I could layer over their light blue really well. Now let's talk about blending. I'll be honest, I do not love blending acrylic markers. I just don't like the experience. It's just not my favorite way to work. But out of these, the best blending experience for me was the probably the Camire and the Giamayo, which these aren't the name brands. The Arctics, I just thought dried a lot faster. The Casimir, even though it's a wetter marker, it doesn't. For some reason, I had a harder time blending it. The Maiden actually blended reasonably well because they are so watery, but I didn't enjoy the process, and I would have to do so many layers to get the opacity I wanted. Um, I don't know why the Casimir was so difficult for me to blend. They just dry so quickly. And even the Arctics didn't blend as well as I was expecting going in. So if your blending is your priority, I'd look at the Camera and Gimayo. Now there are a few different ways to blend. You can put the colors down, work in a small section and blend with your finger, or keep rubbing the markers together, or you can use water. It just isn't my way to go. So the J-Mayo, the markers themselves performed well. In my black color test, they were actually pretty opaque, especially that purple. But the set I tested, I don't have the box anymore. It just didn't give me enough colors for me to really make a judgment call on them. And that becomes a problem when you're actually trying to make artwork. So I don't want to have five really good markers if I can't create the artwork I want because I'm missing half the colors. So if you want this brand, I'd strongly recommend, and that's honestly any brand, getting a larger set with more variety. A marker can be amazing, but if the set doesn't have the colors you actually need, it's not going to be very useful in the end. So what's my final ranking for these acrylic markers? If I were buying acrylic markers on my own with my own money, here's what I would personally choose. Number one is the Casimir. If you want maximum opacity and you're willing to shake your markers before you use them, these are my current favorite. They're super juicy, they're opaque, and they've been fantastic for creating finished artwork. Number two is the Camire. These are probably my favorite if you don't want to deal with shaking. I love the light blues, love the layering with them and blending with them, and they're among the better blending ones I've tested. They're a really good choice if you want a more convenient experience. Number three is the Jamayo. I actually think there's potential here. I just think you need to buy a bigger pack. The opacity was great and they were very juicy and blended well. My problem is that the smaller set didn't give me enough colors to really know whether I'd want to spend my own money on a larger set. Number 4 is going to be the Arctics. I actually paid for these ones myself, and I do like them. They just have a great color selection and they perform well in several areas. But for what I paid, I don't think they're the best value. They're not the juiciest, they're not the most opaque, and I found some of the colors, especially the skin toned reds disappointing. So I wouldn't call them bad. They're just not my favorite. And I don't think they're the best option at their price points. And number 5 is the Maiden. These were just too watery for the way I like to make my art, and I wasn't a fan of their shiny finish either. Even after shaking them, I wasn't getting the opacity I wanted, and I found myself layering way more than I wanted to. So personally, I would pass on the Maiden, and that's really the biggest thing I learned from testing all of these is the best acrylic markers depends on how you make arts. If you want a maximum opacity, I'd go with Casimir. If you want more convenience and don't want to shake, I would go with Kmir. And yeah, I hope this helps you buy the best markers for yourself.